thanks for the lovely introduction, and thanks for the invitation. I appreciate the chance to join everyone here today. And the talk today is going to be provocative. I am stepping outside frames. I'm doing this deliberately in an attempt to encourage us to think about the long cycles of change. I think it's very important that we do so, and I'll try to share with you some of the reasons for that belief. So moving along. If we believe, as Noam Chomsky has said, that globalization began with the age of discovery, then we have about 500 years worth of experience now with perhaps how it can be done, and perhaps we have sufficient information to reflect upon the results of the choices we made about the way in which we pursued globalization in that period of time. So in the case of the Arctic, arguably the first incursion in an industrial sense was Martin Frobisher's attempt to mine fool's gold in Baffin Island, which he did for about 3 years. The Inuit watched this with great interest. I have to speak fairly quickly, and I'm going to skip over some of the slides, but I'll just share this vignette with you to illustrate the differences of viewpoint. When they finally departed for the UK and left for Britain, leaving behind a lot of equipment that they couldn't transport easily, they left behind an anvil. Very useful if you work in iron and you need tools for mining. But for the Inuit, it was a great puzzle. They decided this would be a good toy. This is work done by Robert McGee, fabulous exhibit in the former Museum of Civilization, now the Museum of History. And in the work that he dredged up, he found a drawing by an Inuk in the accounts of Charles Hall. And so the drawing clearly was an anvil, but the Inuit decided this was a toy. And the purpose of the toy was to test strength. And the test was, how far can you throw this thing? So that's what they did, until the Europeans returned and took it away. So long and short, there are many ways of looking at an object and determining what you should do about it. And so that just sort of frames for me the differences. So I want to now move us towards frameworks. So moving to Buzz Halling, C.S. Halling, he's an ecologist. He started off as a fire ecologist working on succession in ecosystems in North America, and has moved on to found something that we think of now as resilient science in the context of ecology and social and cultural systems work. So from his point of view on this long cycle change business, he says, interestingly, local problems of the moment can have part of their cause located half a planet away and have causes whose source is from slow changes accumulated over centuries. Okay, if he's right about that, how can we think about the past to start engaging with what we hope might be a better future for us all by looking at what we're doing in the present and changing that? How can we find that place to stand and those ideas and the courage that we need to move forward? So when I speak about complexity science, this is one of the famous figures out of Panarchy and out of some of the related publications that Halling's group has produced. And if you go to resiliencealliance.org, you can find a lot of this material. It's fascinating. I find it very useful because it connects across time, space, domains. It allows me to plug things in to a moving dynamic system and to make a case that everything and everyone matters. Marginalization is not going to solve anything, and it's to be resisted at all costs. It's something none of us should engage in doing, and when others try to do it to us, we should resist, because it's in our collective interest that we are all present, accounted for, and heard and involved. So, moving on. I make that case because when you look around the world and you look at those who are marginalized, it doesn't matter whether you are in Tibet and you're watching the glaciers recede and you're understanding slowly that the 7 great rivers of South Asia are about to dry up. You know that change is a real change. There's debate, there's oscillation. The glaciers come, the glaciers go. It's like the Arctic ice pack. The changes are annual and decadal, but the long-term changes are that the ice age is ending and we're moving into another phase on Earth. So the long cycles, whether we are in the Himalayas looking at the glaciers or whether we're on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau standing on permafrost. Permafrost that is warm permafrost, meaning that 1 or 2 degrees centigrade global warming will melt all of this, and you will not have pasture land, you will have quagmire. Or whether you're in the Arctic, whether you're on the coastline that when the tide is out, it looks beneficent and calm, but when the tide comes in and there's a wild wind and the polar vortex is working, well, it's a different story, and things are very dramatic and very dangerous. The point is, we are engaged in transforming the Earth for our own purposes, as we have defined them, and we're doing that with no intention really of slowing down or stopping anytime soon. That gives us all something to think about, and we really do have to do that. So, my point, we can think about Thomas Berger, cast our minds back, going back to the 70s. Other people have talked about the 70s in other contexts. Canadians engaged in a very important public policy debate. It had to do with the very first of the pipelines that we were proposing to build in the north. And the question was, do we build the pipelines, or do we listen to the local people and try to get their advice before we go ahead? Justice Thomas Berger said, let's listen. 10-year moratorium, here's the report, these are the things that people say are important, let's find out. And so time was spent and we did look. And we can change our vision of the future, I believe, as we learn, considering that we are learning organisms and we live in learning societies, that we can do this more effectively if we consider the possible value of things like collaborative efforts. We need to reconceptualize our human project. I argue this very strongly. I think it's a serious proposition. What about alternatives for engaging constructively with power and difference within an Arctic commons? What about implementing the spirit of the United Nations Charter, the Declaration, the wording of the Declaration, and the covenants? What about that? And if there's time and questions at the end, I might tell you a story about Sam Ratty. So, Northern Frontier, Northern Homeland. Well, Stephen Hawking has a view. Everyone's heard of Stephen Hawking, I'm sure. He's in favor of migration out to the galaxy. He's given up on Earth. Noam Chomsky has a view. He says, if we were Martians looking at what's going on Earth, we would be very puzzled indeed. We would not be impressed. So, whether you side with Stephen Hawking, or whether you side with Noam Chomsky on this particular point, the human project has operated in a particular fashion for a long time. I've said 500 years of essentially globalization based on Chomsky's definition. I think it's time to rethink what we're doing. And I'm not the only one. So when we speak about the Arctic, we're talking about the area north of 60. The strong line on the diagram to your left is the Arctic Circle. I'm not talking about the state interests. I'm not talking about that kind of geopolitics. My interest is at a more local and regional scale. I'm interested in the people whose lives are directly affected by the changes that are taking place and by the decisions that are being made. And I'm speaking about the people who are living in the Arctic, approximately 6 million of them. And out of that, Inuit comprise about 150,000. These figures are a little bit older, so I'm updating them for you. But the Arctic's been the repository of change for a long time. The issue that was a hot-button issue for me when I joined the National Inuit Organization as legal counsel in 1985 was the northern contaminants issue. It hit the front page of the Globe and Mail. The phone started to ring. People in the communities were hysterical, and the reporters were just relentless. And essentially they said, Inuit food supply is contaminated, everyone's going to be poisoned, and people were, should we stop breastfeeding our babies? And it was just a nightmare. Well, the lesson was we have to pull together. We need science from all domains. It took the federal government 2 years to get organized. They eventually, after a lot of acrimony and a lot of serious fights, established the Northern Contaminants Program with the participation of Indigenous peoples in Canada. So there were Aboriginal representatives on the steering committee, the management committee, and the technical committee, essentially. That gave us a program that's lasted for more than 25 years, has delivered a lot of groundbreaking science, and science of a different order, because it's built a community out of social scientists, physical scientists, and biological scientists, and I include in that the health professionals. So it's been a sea change for Northern science because it was funded quite well, and because it built a community. It's a wonderful object lesson. I'd like us to apply that to the climate issue. So we know the Arctic is changing. The Arctic has always been changing. And if I do get to tell you Sam's story at the end, you'll get to hear a little bit more about another view of that change. So, yes, sea ice has been disappearing. It's at a minimum in 2012. It was at a maximum again last year in terms of the last decade. So, and it depends where you are. So some sections of the Northwest Passage were ice choked, other parts were clear. So there's a lot of variability, and that's one of the points about climate change. It's not just that things have a trajectory and a direction. They also have increasing degrees of variability. And so it's the instability that enhances the risk because the predictability goes down. More and more hunters get stuck on the ice, more and more people drown. It's that kind of reality. There's a history here, and it's a history that Canadians should know about, and many of us have kind of let it slide away. It's about the Cold War. It's about the way the Cold War militarized the Arctic in a new sense and brought it into a new age of technology. So the necklace of black pearls across the top that cuts through Greenland is the distant early warnings line. That's the DEW line. So that was intended to tell people in Washington if missiles were coming across the pole. And that would give people in Washington enough time to push the buttons to make missiles fly in the other direction. And on the ground, people in the north just knew that there were strange folks doing strange things and building strange things too. So this is one of the old DEW line sites. These don't exist very much anymore. There are a few left, but a lot of them decommissioned. The decommissioning has included toxic soil cleanup as well, I'm happy to say. Canada successfully negotiated this with the Americans. We won at least one round. Some of that stuff got cleaned up. I spoke earlier about resilience, and I showed you the wonderful complicated flow diagram with all the colors. This is a kind of a boring monochromatic version, but the point here is that the boundaries in the domains that we speak about are fuzzy, and therefore the flows that go through the domains of change are also a bit ambiguous. It's a little bit like ocean currents that move seasonally and move over the years. So, for example, the North Atlantic Drift that takes warm water out of the Gulf of Mexico, brings it up past Florida, takes it up the south US, takes it across the south of England, and splits off and goes to the north of Norway. That's a very important current. It shifts from year to year. A few years ago, it actually stopped for 3 days. I hope people noticed that. It was very, very important, but I'm not sure that it really got a lot of airtime. Anyway, these flows are very subtle, but there are immeasurable numbers of linkages that are very difficult to discern. I'll give you an example. This is a tipping point. This is a communication tower. This is an installation that the Americans built. They could run it with about 4 or 5 people. This is a bigger base. This is a communication base, so they have more space for more people on a seasonal rotation. That installation and others like it impacted people very directly. So Sam Ratty is standing on your right with the sunglasses, and in the middle you have Jean Chrétien, a very young Jean Chrétien, and beside him you have Tagak Curley. Now, Sam is blind because of that DEW line site. And I'll tell that story at the end if someone wants to ask me about it in the Q&A. At any rate, as a result of blindness, Sam went through the abyss and came out the other side, and we ended up with a land claim settlement in the Western Arctic in 1985. That's the short version. Main point, though, a map is a perspective. These are images of historical treaties on your left. That is the world constructed by governments, British government, Canadian government then. We see other maps. So the emergence of Nunavut, I was chatting at the coffee break with a colleague, very interesting discussion about being in Nunavut at the time of the emergence of the territorial government in 2000. And so this map is a dream. It began as a dream. And so that early reference to Tangle and Markle's vision, that's a true statement. Dreams do beget change, and we have to dream more creatively and more energetically. So we look at some of the dreams of the past, and we've got to reevaluate those as well. This is a new exhibition at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. I was there a couple of weeks ago. It's called Northern Exposure, Southern Attraction. They've gone to a lot of work to dredge up engravings from books and other sources, things I've never seen anywhere else. I've never seen some of these things reproduced either. Very interesting. This one is a British Admiralty vessel marking out British territory by sailing the boat around the bay. Taking Possession is the name of this particular image. My question is that what it's all about? Thinking of the human project, is that what it's all about? Common future in the Arctic. Can we talk about a future without talking about a commons? Can we talk about our future and not think about the other's future, we have to come to some kind of an understanding of our set of relationships in geopolitics that are built around sharing, community, helping one another, and not about militarization and mutually assured destruction. So, another vision of globalization, Ann Buttimer, past president of the International Geographical Union, she argued that there ought to be a new vision of globalization, and for scientists, it should offer a meeting ground for all, for spaces of encounter for minds and hearts, eager to bring about fairer practices of enterprise and trade, respect for the integrity of all human civilizations, reawaken sensitivities to landscape, nature, and cultural identity. Tall order, but I think we could do it. I really do. There are many projections of desire onto the Arctic region, desire for territory, resource wealth, shipping routes, and so forth. But perhaps the most valuable offering is the potential for peace. The Inuit Circumpolar Conference Arctic Policy continues to advocate for a nuclear-free zone in the Arctic. Gorbachev proposed a circumpolar collaboration on environmental planning. The Inuit Circumpolar Conference tried very hard to get Washington to listen to that, unsuccessfully, alas. And, of course, the Canadian Pugwash Group is campaigning for the Arctic nuclear weapon-free zone, which is very, very important. To be successful in realizing these possibilities, perhaps we need to globalize differently and to reconceptualize the human project. Here's a modest proposal. It's not original. Ashavat Kanujuak, who did the tapestry, it's a beautiful 10 by 10 tapestry that she made for the creation of Nunavut. And, of course, the NASA image, the blue world. So a note of appreciation, thank you. Thank you to all of those who have helped me learn the things I've learned, and I hope will have patience with me where I have not learned as well as I might have. And thank you.